My name is Emily, and I'm 32 years old. A single mom from a small Ohio town fighting to keep my kids, Lucas and Sophie, after a divorce that broke my heart. Picture me in a courtroom, hands trembling, holding a faded photo of my babies as my ex's lawyer tears me apart, saying I'm too broke to deserve them. The judge's nod stings worse than the words. Then my 7-year-old son stands up with a letter that changes everything. What would you do when hope feels gone? Share where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to hear the rest. I woke up at 5 in the morning, the apartment still dark except for the faint glow of a streetlight sneaking through the blinds. My alarm buzzed, and I dragged myself out of bed, my bones aching from yesterday's double shift at the diner. The kids were still asleep, Lucas sprawled across his twin bed, Sophie curled up with her stuffed bunny. I tiptoed to the kitchen, flipped on the coffee maker, and started mixing pancake batter. It was our routine, one I clung to like a lifeline. Those quiet moments with the smell of batter sizzling on the griddle made me feel like I was doing something right. Lucas stumbled in first, his hair a mess, rubbing his eyes. At 7, he was all elbows and knees, growing too fast for the clothes I could afford. Sophie followed, her 4-year-old feet pattering on the linoleum. I slid plates in front of them, pancakes stacked high with a drizzle of cheap syrup. Lucas grinned, but Sophie poked at her food, muttering about wanting cereal like they had at daycare. I forced a smile, ignoring the twist in my gut. We didn't have cereal because I'd spent the last of my cash on gas to get to work. After dropping them at school, I rushed to the diner, my apron already stained from yesterday's ketchup spill. The breakfast rush was brutal, plates clattering, customers grumbling about cold eggs. Clara, the 50-year-old waitress who'd seen it all, caught my eye as I balanced a tray of coffee mugs. "You okay, hun?" she asked, her voice rough but kind. I nodded, too tired to admit I wasn't. Clara had this way of seeing through me, like she knew every worry I carried. By noon, I was wiping down tables when my phone buzzed. It was the school. My heart sank. Ms. Carter, Lucas's teacher, said Nathan had shown up unannounced and taken the kids for ice cream. I froze, the rag slipping from my hand. Nathan, my ex, hadn't seen them in 2 years, not since he left for Chicago with his new girlfriend, Tara. He'd called a week ago, all charm and promises, demanding visitation rights. I'd told him to go through the courts, thinking he'd back off. But now he'd gone behind my back, charming the school staff, like he was father of the year. I called him, my hands shaking, as I stood in the diner's break room. "Nathan, what are you doing? You can't just take them." His laugh was sharp, like a blade. "Relax, Emily. They're my kids, too." They had fun. You should have seen Lucas's face when I bought him a triple scoop. I bit my lip, tasting blood. He was baiting me, flaunting his money, knowing I couldn't afford treats like that. I hung up my chest tight and leaned against the wall, trying not to cry. That night, after picking up the kids, I tucked them into bed. Lucas was quiet, his usual chatter gone. I sat on the edge of his bed, brushing his hair back. "Did you have fun with Dad?" I asked, keeping my voice soft. He shrugged, staring at the ceiling. "He's got a big house, Mom, and a dog." I swallowed hard, picturing Nathan's new life all shiny and perfect while we scraped by in this 2-bedroom apartment with creaky floors and peeling paint. Sophie was already asleep, her bunny tucked under her chin. I kissed her forehead, then went to the living room, sinking onto the couch. The weight of the day pressed down on me. Was I failing them? Could Nathan, with his fancy job and big house, give them things I never could? I pulled out a shoebox where I kept their drawings, little stick figures of us, smiling under a bright sun. My eyes stung as I traced Lucas's messy handwriting on one to Mom, love you forever. Clara's words from earlier echoed in my head. You're their mom, Emily. Fight for them. I wanted to, but Nathan's stunt at school felt like a warning shot. He wasn't just back for visits, he wanted control. I curled up on the couch, clutching Lucas's drawing, and let the tears come. The apartment was quiet, but my mind was loud, replaying Nathan's laugh, the teacher's casual tone, the way Lucas looked at me like he was measuring my worth against his dad's. When I checked Lucas's backpack for his homework, I found a crumpled note tucked in the side pocket. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. In his shaky scrawl, it read, "I miss Dad, but I love you more, Mom." My throat tightened. I pressed the note to my chest, a mix of love and fear washing over me. Lucas was trying to protect me, but what was he holding back? What had he seen at Nathan's that made him write this? The next morning, I was still shaken. Lucas's note folded in my pocket like a fragile promise. I burned the toast, my hands unsteady, and Sophie whined about the smell. I apologized, scraping the blackened edges into the sink, my mind stuck on Nathan's move. At the diner, I spilled coffee on a customer's lap, my thoughts a tangle of worry. Clara pulled me aside during a lull, her eyes sharp. "You can't let him rattle you, Emily. He's playing games." I nodded, but her words felt like trying to hold water in my hands. By afternoon, a letter arrived delivered to the diner since I couldn't afford to miss a shift. The envelope was crisp with the lawyer's logo in the corner. My stomach dropped. I tore it open in the break room, my pulse loud in my ears. Nathan was filing for full custody, claiming I was an unfit mother, too broke and unstable to care for Lucas and Sophie. The words blurred as I read them, each one a punch. He'd listed my late rent, my long hours, even an old speeding ticket, twisting my life into proof I wasn't enough. I drove to the legal aid office after work, the letter crumpled in my purse. The waiting room smelled of stale coffee and despair, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Rebecca, the attorney assigned to me, was kind but blunt. She adjusted her glasses, scanning the letter. "Nathan's got money and a clean record, Emily. This won't be easy. You need to show stability, prove you're the better parent." I gripped the arms of the chair, my knuckles white. How I'm barely keeping us afloat. She sighed, promising to do what she could, but her caseload was heavy, and I felt like a number. That night I called Nathan, pacing the apartment while the kids watched cartoons. The TV's laugh track mocked me as I waited for him to pick up. When he did, his voice was smooth, like he'd been expecting me. "Emily, what's this about?" I took a breath, trying to stay calm. "Why are you doing this? You left us. You don't even know them anymore." He chuckled low and cruel. "You're drowning, Emily. Let me save them. They deserve better than a mom who's always scraping by." I wanted to scream, but my voice cracked instead. "They deserve love, Nathan." I hung up my hands, shaking his words, carving a hole in my chest. At bedtime, I tried talking to Lucas, hoping to understand what he was feeling. I sat on his bed, the mattress creaking under me. "Sweetie, what's it like when you're with Dad?" He pulled the blanket up to his chin, his eyes darting away. "He says you're tired all the time, Mom. That you work too much." My heart sank. I reached for his hand, but he pulled back, curling into himself. I left the room, my throat tight, feeling like I was losing him to Nathan's lies. My mom came over the next day, her purse slung over her shoulder like she was ready to fix everything. Diane had always been practical, her hair pulled back, her voice sharp with opinions. She sat at my kitchen table sipping tea and didn't hold back. "You should have stayed with him, Emily. For the kids. Stability matters." I stared at her, my jaw tight. I couldn't stay with someone who didn't love us, Mom. She shook her head like I was naive, and I felt the gap between us widen. I needed her support, not her judgment. Later, as I folded laundry, Sophie was coloring on the floor, humming softly. Lucas sat nearby, unusually quiet, flipping through a comic book. I watched them, my heart heavy with the weight of Nathan's letter and my mom's words. Then I overheard Lucas whisper to Sophie, his voice low. Don't tell Mom about the secret, okay? Sophie nodded, her crayons pausing. I froze mid-fold, a chill running through me. What secret? I knelt beside Lucas, keeping my tone gentle. Sweetie, what are you talking about? He looked away, his lips pressed tight, and mumbled, Nothing, Mom. But his eyes held something heavy, something he wasn't ready to share. I stood up, my hands clammy, the apartment suddenly feeling too small. Nathan's custody filing Lucas's silence. My mom's doubts, they all pressed in, suffocating me. Whatever Lucas was hiding, it was tied to Nathan, and I needed to know what it was before it tore us apart. The first court hearing came faster than I expected, and I was a wreck. I stood in front of my cracked bathroom mirror, smoothing out my one decent dress, a navy blue thing I'd bought secondhand for a job interview years ago. It was snug now, but it'd have to do. My hands shook as I pinned my hair up, trying to look like someone who had it together. Lucas and Sophie were with my neighbor Jack, a retired veteran who'd offered to watch them. I kissed their foreheads before leaving, promising I'd be back soon, but Lucas's quiet stare followed me out the door. The courtroom was cold, all polished wood and stiff chairs. I sat beside Rebecca, my legal aid lawyer, clutching my purse like it could shield me. Nathan was across the aisle, pristine in a tailored gray suit, his jaw set like he owned the place. His girlfriend Tara sat behind him, her blonde hair sleek, her eyes flicking over me with a mix of pity and disdain. The judge, a stern older man with wire-rimmed glasses, called the session to order, and my stomach twisted into knots. Nathan's lawyer, a sharp-faced woman named Ms. Langley, went first. She stood, her voice crisp, and started dismantling my life. She brought up my bout with depression after the divorce, twisting it into proof I was unstable. My cheeks burned as she read from a medical record, her tone dripping with judgment. I wanted to shout that I'd pulled myself out of that darkness for my kids, but I stayed silent, my nails digging into my palms. Rebecca scribbled notes, whispering, "Stay calm, Emily. We'll get our turn." Then Tara took the stand, her heels clicking as she walked. She swore in her voice, soft but deliberate. "Emily works long hours," she said, glancing at the judge. "The kids wear clothes that don't fit, and their apartment is cramped. They deserve better." I bit my lip, tasting the sting of her words. She wasn't wrong about the clothes or the apartment, but she made it sound like I didn't care. Every dollar I earned went to food, rent, or school supplies. I'd skipped meals to buy Sophie new shoes last month. How dare she? Back at home, things were unraveling. Lucas came home from school with a note from his teacher, Ms. Harper. He'd gotten into a fight, shoving a kid who'd teased him about our apartment, calling it a dump. I sat him down at the kitchen table, my heart heavy. "Why didn't you tell me, buddy?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. He shrugged his eyes on the table. "They said Dad's house is better. I don't want to go there, but..." His voice trailed off, and I saw the conflict in his hunched shoulders. I hugged him, promising we'd figure it out, but inside, I was crumbling. Sophie was struggling too. She'd started clinging to me at night, crawling into my bed, her small body trembling. "I don't want to leave you, Mommy," she whispered one night, her bunny pressed to her chest. I stroked her hair, murmuring that I'd never let that happen, but my words felt hollow. What if the judge believed Tara? What if Nathan's money and lies won? Jack stopped by one evening, bringing over a casserole his sister had made. He was a gruff man, his face lined from years of hard living, but his eyes softened when he saw me. He sat on my couch, sharing stories of his own custody fight decades ago. "I lost my girls for a while," he said, his voice low. "But you keep fighting, Emily. You're stronger than you know." His words were a lifeline, but they couldn't quiet the doubt gnawing at me. Was I strong enough? Or was Nathan right that the kids would be better off with him late at night? I pulled out my journal, the one I'd started when Nathan left. My pen scratched across the page as I poured out my fears. What if I lose them? What if Lucas thinks I'm not enough? What if Sophie forgets how much I love her? I wrote until my hand cramped, but the questions didn't stop. Then I found Sophie's latest drawing tucked under a pile of bills on the counter. It showed our family stick figures under a lopsided sun, but Nathan's face was scribbled out in black crayon. My breath caught. What had she seen at his house to make her do that? The weight of it all was crushing me, and the next hearing was only days away. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Nathan's lawyer was building a case I couldn't counter, and Lucas's secret, whatever it was, hung over me like a storm cloud. I needed to hold on for my kids, but I was slipping. The second hearing was worse than the first. I sat in the same stiff courtroom chair, my palms sweaty, my dress feeling tighter, like it was choking me. Rebecca had prepped me, but nothing could brace me for the onslaught. Nathan's lawyer, Ms. Langley, stood up her briefcase, snapping open with a sound that echoed in my head. She slid a stack of papers across to the judge, her voice cold and precise. Emily Carter's financial records, Your Honor. Late rent payments, unpaid medical bills, a car loan in default. Proof she can't provide a stable home. I stared at the table, my face hot, each word slicing deeper. She was right about the bills, but she didn't mention the nights I went without dinner to pay them or the hours I spent budgeting every penny. The judge's face was unreadable, his pen scratching notes. I wanted to scream that I was trying, that I loved my kids more than anything, but my throat was dry, my voice gone. Rebecca squeezed my arm, but it felt distant, like I was sinking underwater. Then Ms. Langley called me to the stand. My legs wobbled as I walked the courtroom, tilting. I swore in my hand, trembling on the Bible, and sat feeling Nathan's eyes on me, heavy and smug. Ms. Langley didn't waste time. Ms. Carter, you work 12-hour shifts, correct? I nodded, my mouth dry. And yet your children wear second-hand clothes and live in a one-bedroom apartment. If you care so much, why do you prioritize work over them? Her words were a trap, and I stumbled into it. I work to keep a roof over their heads, I said, my voice shaking. We're doing our best. She smirked, leaning closer. Your best isn't enough, is it? Lucas got in a fight at school. Sophie's teacher reports she's withdrawn. Is that your best? I froze my chest tight. I couldn't answer, not with the judge watching, not with Nathan's faint chuckle in the background. When I stepped down, my legs felt like jelly. Rebecca tried to reassure me, but her words blurred. Nathan's lawyer was painting me as a failure, and the judge's silence felt like agreement. I glanced at Nathan, his tie perfectly knotted, his posture relaxed like he'd already won. Tara wasn't there this time, and I wondered why, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Back home, Lucas was moody, slamming his bedroom door after dinner. I knocked, but he yelled, "Leave me alone, Mom!" I stood there, my hand on the doorknob, feeling like I was losing him. Ms. Harper, his teacher, had called earlier, her voice gentle but firm. Lucas is struggling, Emily. He's not himself. I recommend counseling, but I know it's expensive. I'd thanked her, my voice hollow, then hung up, staring at my bank account on my phone. $23 until payday. Counseling was a pipe dream. I tried talking to Nathan, one last desperate attempt to stop this. I waited until the kids were asleep, then called him, pacing the living room. The apartment was dark, the hum of the fridge the only sound. When he answered, his voice was icy. What now? Emily. I swallowed my pride, my voice low. Can we work this out? Shared custody. Something fair? I just want what's best for them. He laughed, sharp and bitter. You think you're what's best? I'm done playing nice. I want them, period. He hung up, and I sank to the floor, my phone slipping from my hand. The next day, I was folding laundry when Lucas came home, his backpack slung low. He didn't look at me, just went to his room. I followed, my heart pounding, and sat on his bed. Sweetie, what's going on? You can tell me anything. He fiddled with a loose thread on his blanket, his voice barely a whisper. I saw a locked box in Dad's office last weekend. He got mad when I asked about it. I pressed, keeping my tone soft. What kind of box? He shook his head, his eyes wide. I don't know, Mom. I shouldn't have said anything. He clammed up, and I didn't push, but my mind raced. What was Nathan hiding? That night, I couldn't sleep, my thoughts a storm. The court, Lucas's fight, Sophie's fears, Nathan's locked box. It all swirled, suffocating me. I got up, tiptoeing to the kids' room. Sophie was curled up, her bunny under her arm, but Lucas was awake, staring at the ceiling. I sat beside him, my voice a whisper. I love you, buddy, no matter what. He didn't answer, but his hand found mine, and for a moment, I held on. But the hearing was tomorrow, and I knew Nathan's lawyer wasn't done. I was drowning, and the shore was nowhere in sight. The final hearing was here, and I felt like I was walking into a storm. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and old paper, the air heavy with tension. I sat next to Rebecca, my hands folded tightly in my lap, my navy dress damp with sweat. Lucas sat beside me, his small hand gripping mine, his eyes wide but steady. Sophie was in the back with Jack, her stuffed bunny clutched tight. Nathan sat across the aisle, his suit crisp, his face a mask of confidence I wanted to shatter. The judge entered, his robes rustling, and my heart pounded so loud I thought everyone could hear it. Ms. Langley, Nathan's lawyer, stood for her closing argument, her voice slicing through the room. Emily Carter is unfit. Your Honor, she's broke, working endless hours, leaving her children in a crumbling apartment with no future. Lucas and Sophie need stability, a home where they're not scraping by. Nathan can provide that. I stared at the floor, my throat burning, her words hammering every insecurity I'd ever had. The judge nodded slightly, his pen tapping the bench, and I felt my world slipping away. Rebecca scribbled notes, but I couldn't look at her. I was drowning in shame, in fear, in the thought that I might lose my kids. I squeezed Lucas's hand, my fingers trembling. He looked up at me, his face pale but determined, and I forced a small smile, trying to be strong for him. The gallery was quiet, the air thick, and I could feel Tara's absence like a ghost in the room. Why wasn't she here? Had Nathan told her to stay away? My mind spun, but there was no time to dwell. Ms. Langley sat down, her smirk faint but sharp, and the judge turned to Rebecca, asking for our closing. I braced myself, knowing we had little to counter, with just my love for my kids and a thin stack of character references. Then Lucas tugged at my sleeve, his voice a whisper. Mom, can I say something? I blinked, startled, my heart lurching. Sweetie, this isn't the time, I murmured, glancing at Rebecca. But Lucas was already standing, his small frame rigid with purpose. Your Honor, he said, his voice clear, cutting through the room. Can I show you something? The judge raised an eyebrow, surprised, and the courtroom stirred. Nathan shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. Rebecca leaned over, whispering, Let him try. It's a long shot, but it might help. I knotted my stomach in knots, unsure what Lucas was doing, but trusting his heart. The judge beckoned Lucas forward, his expression curious but stern. Lucas walked to the bench, his sneakers squeaking on the floor, and pulled a crumpled envelope from his pocket. "I found this in Dad's safe," he said, handing it to the judge. "I think you should read it." My breath caught. A letter? What letter I'd never seen it, never heard Lucas mention it beyond that vague talk of a locked box. Nathan's face drained of color, his hands gripping the table, and his lawyer shot him a panicked glance. The room went still, the silence so thick it pressed against my chest. The judge unfolded the envelope, his eyes scanning the page. His face changed, hardening, his brows knitting together. I watched, frozen, my pulse racing. What was in that letter? Why was Nathan looking like he'd been caught? Lucas stood there, small but unshaken, and I felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. He'd carried this secret, whatever it was, and now it was in the judge's hands. Rebecca leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "This could change everything, Emily." I nodded, but I couldn't speak. My eyes locked on the judge, waiting for the truth to break free. The judge cleared his throat, his voice steady but heavy, and began reading the letter aloud. To Tara it started, and my heart stopped. Nathan's handwriting, sharp and slanted, spilled out in words that burned. "I'm doing this to break Emily," he wrote. "The custody fight isn't about the kids. It's about making her pay for leaving me. I'll drain her dry, keep her in court until she's got nothing left. Lucas and Sophie are just leverage." My breath hitched, tears spilling down my cheeks before I could stop them. The room spun, every word, a knife twisting deeper. Nathan leapt to his feet, his voice shrill. "That's fake! She forged it!" His lawyer grabbed his arm, hissing for him to sit, but the judge's glare silenced him. The letter went on cold and calculated. "I've hidden money in offshore accounts," Nathan wrote. "No child support, no trace. Let Emily struggle. She deserves it." My hands covered my mouth, stifling a sob. He'd planned this every step to destroy me. Not for love of our kids, but for revenge. The judge's voice never wavered, each sentence landing like a gavel. The gallery murmured a low hum of shock, and I felt their eyes on me, pity and horror mixed. Lucas stood by the bench, his small shoulders squared, but his lip trembled as he glanced back at me. My boy, my brave boy, had carried this poison alone. I wanted to run to him to shield him from the ugliness, but my legs wouldn't move. I was pinned by the truth, raw and jagged, tearing open wounds I thought had scarred over. Nathan's face was ashen, his hands clenched into fists. He muttered something to Ms. Langley, but she shook her head, her composure cracking. The judge paused, holding up the letter, his eyes narrowing. "This alleges serious misconduct, Mr. Carter. Hiding assets, manipulating the court." He folded the paper, his gaze shifting to Nathan, who shrank under the weight. I should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was grief. My kids had a father who saw them as pawns. How could I explain that to them? A commotion broke out in the back. Tara burst through the doors, her face flushed, her heels loud against the floor. She pointed at Nathan, her voice shaking. "You lied to me. You said this was for the kids." She turned to the judge, her words spilling fast. "I didn't know, Your Honor. He told me Emily was neglectful." I believed him. The judge raised a hand, but Tara kept going, her eyes wild. "We fought about this last night. That's why I wasn't here. I'm done with him." She stormed out the doors, slamming behind her, and the room fell into stunned silence. I looked at Lucas, my vision blurred with tears. He'd seen his father's cruelty, hidden it to protect me, and now stood exposed in this cold room. My heart ached for him, for Sophie, for the family we'd lost to Nathan's hate. The judge set the letter down, his voice cutting through the haze. We'll recess to verify this document's authenticity. Counsel prepare for further inquiry. He stood his robes sweeping, and the bailiff called for order. I sat frozen, my hands shaking in my lap, Lucas's small form blurring before me. Nathan's betrayal was laid bare, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a wound ripped open, bleeding out in front of strangers. My kids were caught in this war, and I was helpless, trapped in the wreckage of a truth too heavy to bear. The recess felt like an eternity, the courtroom emptying into a blur of murmurs and footsteps. I pulled Lucas into my arms as we stepped into the hallway, his small body tense against mine. My lips brushed his forehead, and I whispered, "You were so brave, buddy." He nodded, but his eyes were distant, like he was carrying a weight I couldn't reach. Rebecca ushered us to a quiet corner, her voice low and urgent. "That letter's a game changer, Emily. We need to push now hard." I nodded, my mind still reeling from Nathan's words, his cold plan to ruin me laid bare. I knelt in front of Lucas, my hands gentle on his shoulders. "Sweetie, why didn't you tell me about the letter?" He looked at the floor, scuffing his sneaker. "I didn't want you to be sad, Mom. I thought it'd make things worse." My throat tightened, and I hugged him again, swallowing the ache. He'd protected me, but at what cost? I stood, resolve hardening in my chest. No more hiding, no more fear. Nathan had played his hand, and now it was my turn. Rebecca and I sat on a bench, papers spread between us. She tapped the letter, her eyes sharp. "We can request a financial audit of Nathan's accounts. If he's hiding money, it's fraud. It'll weaken his case." I hesitated, the idea daunting. Audits sounded expensive, complicated, but her confidence steadied me. "Do it," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "Let's prove he's lying." She nodded, jotting notes, and for the first time, I felt a spark of control, like I wasn't just reacting to Nathan's blows. Outside the courthouse, Nathan was pacing, his phone pressed to his ear, his face tight with panic. I caught his eye, my heart pounding, and instead of looking away, I held his gaze. "I'm not done, Nathan," I said, my voice steady, loud enough for him to hear. "You don't get to win this." He froze, his mouth opening, but no words came. I turned away, my pulse racing, feeling the shift inside me. I'd been shrinking for months, but not anymore. My kids deserved a fighter, and I was ready to be one. Back at the diner that evening, Clara was waiting, her apron slung over her shoulder. She'd heard about the hearing from Jack and pulled me into a hug before I could speak. "You're not alone, hon," she said, her voice gruff but warm. "The whole crew's pitching in." She handed me a jar stuffed with crumpled bills and coins, the diner's tips from the week. "We're starting a fundraiser for your legal fees." My eyes stung, and I tried to protest, but she waved me off. "Take it, Emily. Fight for those babies." I clutched the jar, overwhelmed, the weight of their support anchoring me. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the apartment quiet, except for the hum of the fridge. Lucas and Sophie were asleep, their soft breathing a reminder of why I couldn't give up. I pulled out a notebook, my pen trembling as I started writing. "Dear Judge." I began, my words spilling out. "I'm not perfect, but I love my kids with everything I am. Every late night, every missed meal, every tear, it's for them. I wrote about the mornings we danced to radio songs, the stories I read until my voice gave out the promises I'd kept, even when I was breaking. This wasn't for Nathan or the court, but for me to remind myself who I was. When I finished, I sealed the letter, my hands steady. I'd give it to Rebecca to submit a piece of my heart to counter Nathan's lies. For the first time in months, I felt a fire in me, not just fear. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was choosing to fight to stand tall for Lucas and Sophie, to show them what love could do. The battle wasn't over, but I was ready to face it one step at a time. The hearing resumed, and the courtroom felt different, like the air had shifted. I sat straighter, my hands no longer trembling. Lucas's small frame pressed close beside me. Rebecca stood, her voice clear and steady, holding up the letter Lucas had found.
Your Honor, this document reveals Nathan Carter's intent to manipulate this court. We request a forensic audit of his finances and temporary custody for Emily pending the investigation.
My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was purpose, sharp and alive, coursing through me. Ms. Langley objected, her tone flustered, but the judge raised a hand, his eyes narrowing.
Given the allegations, I'm inclined to allow the audit. Ms. Carter, your request for temporary custody is granted until we have clarity.
A murmur rippled through the room, and I exhaled, a weight lifting off my chest. Lucas squeezed my hand, his small fingers warm, and I looked down at him, my eyes stinging with gratitude. We weren't safe yet, but we had a foothold, a chance. Nathan's face was a storm, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting to his lawyer, who scribbled furiously. I didn't look away this time. I let him see me unbowed, a mother who wouldn't break. The judge adjourned for the day, and as we filed out, I felt the stares of the gallery, not pity now, but something closer to respect. Rebecca pulled me aside, her smile tight but hopeful. You did good, Emily. Keep pushing. I nodded, my resolve like steel in my veins. At home, I sat Sophie down, her small legs swinging as she perched on the couch. I'd avoided talking about the court with her, scared of confusing her 4-year-old heart, but I needed her to feel safe. Baby, I said, kneeling to meet her eyes. Mommy's fighting to keep us together. No matter what, I love you. She tilted her head, her curls bouncing. Even if Daddy wants me. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. Daddy loves you too, but I'm your home. Always. She hugged me, her arms fierce, and I held her, my heart aching for her innocence caught in this mess. The next day, my mom showed up, her suitcase in tow, her face softer than I'd seen in years. She set a pot of soup on the stove, the smell of thyme filling the apartment. I owe you an apology, Emily, she said, her voice low. I didn't see how hard you were fighting. Let me help with the kids while you do this. I hesitated, old hurts flaring, but her eyes were earnest, and I nodded. Okay, Mom. Thank you. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a start, a bridge we could rebuild. Clara called later, her voice crackling with excitement.
The fundraiser's growing on. Folks at the diner are spreading the word.
I thanked her, my voice thick, and after hanging up, I opened my laptop. I started a blog, something I'd never considered before, typing out our story not for pity, but for strength. I wrote about Lucas's courage, Sophie's hugs, the jar of tips that felt like a lifeline. If I could share this, maybe other moms would feel less alone. It was small, but it was mine, a way to claim my voice. By the weekend, Rebecca had news. The forensic accountant found discrepancies in Nathan's records, odd transfers to accounts overseas. It's not proof yet, she said, but it's enough to keep the judge's attention. The report would take weeks, but it was a crack in Nathan's armor. I stood in the kitchen, the phone still in my hand, and looked at the kids playing in the living room. Lucas was building a fort with blankets, Sophie giggling as she crawled inside. They were my why, my everything. I walked to the window, the evening sky streaked with pink, and pressed my hand to the glass. The world outside was quiet, but inside me a fire burned steady. I wasn't the woman who'd crumbled under Nathan's lies anymore. I was Emily, their mom, and I'd fight with every breath.
I turned back to the kids, my eyes meeting Lucas's, and gave him a nod, silent but sure. We were in this together, and I wasn't letting go. The accountant's report came faster than I expected, its pages heavy with numbers I barely understood, but carried a weight that shifted everything. I sat in Rebecca's office, the fluorescent lights buzzing as she laid it out. Nathan had funneled money into hidden accounts, dodging taxes and child support for years. The judge had seen enough to call an emergency hearing, and now, weeks after Lucas's letter, the courtroom felt less like a trap. I wore a new blouse bought with Clara's fundraiser money, its soft cotton giving me a quiet strength. The judge didn't mince words. "Mr. Carter, your actions constitute fraud," he said, his voice like gravel. "You've misled this court and neglected your obligations." Nathan sat rigid, his knuckles white, no trace of the smugness I'd grown used to. "Ms. Langley." His lawyer stood abruptly, her face tight. "Your Honor, my client and I need to discuss ethical concerns. I'm withdrawing." The room stirred, a low gasp rippling through. Nathan's head snapped toward her, his mouth opening, but she was already gathering her files, leaving him exposed. I glanced at Lucas sitting with Jack in the back, his small hands folded neatly. He didn't smile, but his eyes met mine, steady and proud. Sophie was at daycare, spared this scene, and I was grateful for that. Rebecca leaned close, her whisper urgent. "This is huge, Emily. He's crumbling." I nodded, but my chest was tight, not with victory, but with the strange ache of seeing Nathan unravel. He'd been my husband once, the father of my kids, and now he was a stranger undone by his own choices. Outside, Nathan cornered me in the hallway, his voice low and desperate. "Let's settle, Emily. Shared custody, no more court. I'll make it easy." His eyes darted, searching for a crack in me, but I stood tall, my voice calm. "No, Nathan. You don't get to rewrite this now. My kids deserve better than your games." He stepped back, his face paling, and for the first time I saw fear in him. Not of me, but of losing control. I walked away, my steps firm, the fundraiser jar's weight in my memory grounding me. Clara's efforts had spread beyond the diner. A local paper ran a story about our fight, calling me a mom who wouldn't quit. I read it at the kitchen table, my coffee growing cold, feeling exposed, but oddly lifted. Strangers had donated their notes tucked in envelopes saying things like, "Keep going and you're enough." I tucked them in a drawer, not ready to believe them, but unable to throw them away. The money let me hire a new lawyer, Ms. Torres, a sharp woman with a reputation for winning tough cases. She met me at the diner, her briefcase dwarfing my notepad, and promised to push for full custody. At home, I watched Lucas, carefully worried the hearing had scarred him. He was quieter, sketching in a notebook instead of playing outside. I sat with him one evening, the apartment lit by a single lamp. "What are you drawing, buddy?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He showed me a picture of a birdhouse, its lines precise. "Jack's teaching me to build one," he said, his voice soft. I smiled, my heart easing. Jack's steady presence was a gift, giving Lucas something solid to hold on to. I lay awake that night, the ceiling fan clicking softly. The tide was turning, but it didn't feel like triumph. Nathan's desperation, Lucas's silence, Sophie's unanswered questions about her dad, they all pressed against me. I'd fought to get here, but the cost was heavy, etched in my kids' eyes. The next hearing would decide everything, and though I was stronger, I felt the ground shifting, uncertain what came next. I closed my eyes, the quiet swallowing me, my heart caught in the stillness of a battle not yet won. The final ruling came on a gray morning, the courtroom quieter than before, like the air itself was holding its breath. I sat beside Ms. Torres, my new lawyer, my hands folded in my lap, the weight of the past months etched into my skin. The judge's voice was steady, each word deliberate.
based on evidence of financial misconduct and intent to deceive Emily Carter, is granted full custody of Lucas and Sophie Carter. Nathan Carter is ordered to pay back child support, effective immediately. I exhaled, my shoulders, sagging relief washing over me like a slow tide. Lucas, sitting with Jack, looked at me, his small nod saying more than words could. Nathan didn't move, his face a mask, his eyes fixed on the table. The judge dismissed us, and the room emptied, but Nathan lingered, his hands gripping his briefcase. I didn't look at him. I took Lucas's hand, and we walked out Sophie's daycare pickup, waiting the world outside, feeling sharper, clearer. By evening, I learned Nathan had left for Chicago, his calls to the kids reduced to a single voicemail I didn't play. Lucas seemed lighter, his shoulders less hunched, but Sophie asked about him at bedtime, her voice small. "Where's Daddy?" I tucked her in my fingers, brushing her curls, and said, "He's far away, baby, but I'm here." Her frown lingered, and I felt the bittersweet sting of our victory. At the diner, Clara threw her arms around me, her laugh loud enough to turn heads. "We won, hon," she said, but I only smiled the word won, feeling too big for the quiet ache in me. I went home and found Lucas in his room, his birdhouse nearly finished, sandpaper smoothing its edges. He didn't talk about the court, and I didn't push. Instead, I sat with him, watching his careful hands, the focus in his eyes, a mirror of my own. Jack had given him this a way to build something whole, and I was grateful. I tried to mark the moment with a family dinner, setting the table with our mismatched plates, cooking spaghetti with sauce from a jar. Sophie twirled her fork, her giggles filling the room, but then she stopped, her eyes wide. "Will Daddy come back?" she asked, her voice breaking the warmth. Lucas froze his fork halfway to his mouth. I set my glass down, my throat tight, and reached for her hand. "I don't know, sweetie," I said, honest but gentle. "But we're okay, just us." She nodded, but her silence hung heavy, and the meal ended quietly. The joy dimmed. The next day, a letter arrived, Nathan's handwriting, stark on the envelope. I stood in the kitchen, the kids at school, and opened it, my hands steady but cold. "I'm sorry, Emily," he wrote. "I was wrong. Give me a chance to make it right." His words were neat, practiced, but they felt hollow, like a script he thought I'd buy. I read it twice, then folded it and tucked it in a drawer, my heart unmoved. He'd hurt us too deeply, and apologies couldn't rebuild what he'd broken. I walked to the kids' school, the autumn air sharp, and watched them play through the fence, Sophie chasing a friend, Lucas kicking a ball. They were mine safe, but the cost was carved in their small faces, in the questions they didn't ask. I'd fought for them, won for them, but the silence Nathan left behind was a wound I couldn't heal. I stood there, my breath fogging in the chill, and felt the world pause, heavy with what we'd lost and what we still carried. The new apartment was small, but it was ours, a step up from the old place with its creaky floors. I stood in the living room, sunlight filtering through clean windows, and watched Lucas and Sophie unpack their books onto a shelf I'd painted blue. My promotion at the diner, a surprise from the manager after the local paper's story, meant we could afford this place with a second bedroom and a tiny balcony. I'd hung a wind chime out there, its soft clinks a sound I hadn't known I needed. Life wasn't perfect, but it was steady, and that was enough for now. Lucas came to me one evening, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. He'd been in counseling for a month, a program Ms. Harper had helped us find, and I could see the change in him, a lightness in his step. We sat on the couch, the room lit by a thrift store lamp, and he opened the book. "I drew our new house," he said, showing me a pencil sketch of our building, the balcony detailed with tiny lines. "It's got a garden in the back, see?" I smiled, tracing the drawing. "It's beautiful, buddy," Maybe we'll plant one someday. He nodded, his eyes bright, and I felt a warmth settle in me, like we were building more than just a home. The next day, Ms. Harper called, her voice warm through the phone. "Lucas is doing great, Emily. I'm nominating him for a Courage Award at school. He's been helping younger kids sharing his art." I stood in the diner's break room, the clatter of dishes fading, and pressed the phone closer. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick. "It means a lot." Hanging up, I leaned against the wall, picturing Lucas's shy smile. He was finding his way, and I was learning to trust that he'd be okay, that we all would. I hadn't touched Nathan's letter since it arrived, its edges still crisp in the drawer. That night, I pulled it out, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea gone cold. I read his words again. "I'm sorry. Give me a chance." But they didn't stir me. I didn't hate him anymore, not like before. He was a man who'd lost himself, and I couldn't carry his regret. I slipped the letter back into the drawer, deciding not to answer. Not now, maybe not ever. My kids needed me present, not tangled in his shadow. The apartment felt alive with small changes. I'd bought a rug for the living room, its soft gray threads a luxury after years of bare floors. Sophie twirled on it, her laughter echoing, and I joined her spinning until we collapsed in a giggling heap. Lucas rolled his eyes, but grinned, snapping a photo with my phone. These moments, unscripted, and ours, were what I'd fought for. They weren't grand, but they were real, stitching us back together. I walked to the balcony later, the night air cool against my skin. The wind chimes sang, and I leaned on the railing, looking at the stars peeking through the city's glow. I'd spent so long running, fighting, fearing I'd lose everything. Now standing still, I felt the pieces of me settling, not whole, but stronger. The kids were asleep, their dreams safe behind these walls. I breathed deep, the quiet wrapping around me, and let myself rest in it just for a moment. The weekend brought friends to our new apartment, a small gathering that filled the air with laughter and the smell of grilled burgers. Clara arrived with a tray of her famous coleslaw, Jack carried a case of soda, and a couple of old high school friends, Sarah and Mia, showed up with their kids. Sophie darted around with the others, her ponytail bouncing, while Lucas showed off his birdhouse to Jack, their heads bent close. I stood by the counter, slicing tomatoes, and felt the warmth of this makeshift family people who'd seen me at my lowest and stayed. After everyone left, I cleaned up the quiet settling in. Sophie's drawings were scattered on the coffee table, bright swirls of color depicting our new home, the balcony's wind chimes sketched in blue crayon. I picked one up, my fingers tracing her wobbly lines, and pinned it to the fridge, its place among grocery lists and school flyers feeling right. She was marking this space as ours, and I was learning to let her. I took a walk alone that evening, the neighborhood hushed streetlights casting soft pools of light. My sneakers scuffed the sidewalk, and I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, curled up on the old apartment's couch, terrified I'd lose everything. That fear was still there, a faint echo, but it didn't rule me anymore. I'd made mistakes, doubted myself, but I'd also stood up, fought, and built something new. Not perfect, just mine. My mom called the next day, her voice tentative. She wanted to move closer, help with the kids more. I stirred my coffee, the spoon clinking against the mug, and considered her offer. Part of me wanted to keep her at arm's length to protect the independence I'd clawed for. But I heard the softness in her tone, the regret she didn't name. "Let's talk about it." I said my words careful but open. "I need boundaries, Mom, but I'd like you near." She exhaled, and I felt the air between us shift, not healed, but mending. Lucas brought up Nathan at dinner, his fork pausing over his peas. "Can we visit Dad someday?" he asked, his voice small but clear. Sophie looked up, her eyes wide, waiting for my answer.
I set my glass down, my heart steady. "Maybe, buddy," I said honest. "When you're ready, we'll figure it out." He nodded, returning to his food, and I saw the trust in his glance a quiet gift. I didn't have all the answers, but I had time, and that was enough. Later, I sat on the balcony, the wind chimes' notes blending with the distant hum of traffic. The kids were in bed, their laughter from earlier still lingering in my mind. I wrapped my hands around a warm mug, the stars faint above the city's glow. I wasn't the same Emily who'd walked into that courtroom shaking and small. I'd grown through the cracks like grass pushing through concrete. Life was messy, but it was ours, and I was ready to keep going one steady step at a time. I'm Emily, 32, standing in our new apartment's kitchen, the morning light spilling across the counter. It's been months since the courtroom, and the scars are still there, but they're softer now, like lines in a book I've read and set aside. Lucas is at school, his backpack heavier with art supplies than worries. Sophie's in the living room humming as she strings beads into a bracelet, her small fingers nimble. I'm stirring oatmeal, the steam warm on my face, and it hits me how these quiet routines have become my anchor holding us steady. I started jogging in the mornings, something I never thought I'd do. Just a loop around the block, my sneakers pounding the pavement, my breath even. It's not about being fast. It's about moving, feeling my body carry me forward. The first time I stopped halfway, lungs burning, but I kept going the next day. Now I nod to the same dog walker each sunrise, his golden retriever wagging its tail. These small habits, they're stitching me back together piece by piece. The diner's still my world, but I'm different there too. I laugh easier, swap stories with Clara over coffee refills, and slip extra fries to the kids who come in with their parents. Last week, I trained a new waitress, a young mom like me, her eyes tired but hopeful. I showed her how to balance trays, but also how to breathe through the chaos. "You've got this," I told her, and meant it because I've been there, and I'm still standing. My blog's grown a corner of the internet where I write about our days, the good and the messy. I posted about Sophie's bead bracelets, how she sells them to neighbors for $1 each, her grin brighter than the coins. Readers comment, sharing their own stories, and I read every one, my heart full. It's not fame, just connection, a reminder I'm not alone. I save the extra cash from it, dreaming of a down payment on a house, a place with a yard for the kids to run. I see my mom more now, her visits less tense. She brings puzzles for Sophie, sits with Lucas while he sketches, and we talk over tea, careful but real. I've learned to let her in, not as a fixer but as family. Clara and Jack are constants too, stopping by with leftovers or stories, their presence a quiet strength. Rebecca, my lawyer, sent a card last month congratulating me on the custody win. I keep it on my dresser, a reminder of how far we've come. At night, when the kids are asleep, I sit by the window, the city's hum distant. I don't dwell on Nathan anymore. He's a shadow fading with each day we build without him. Lucas wants to be a writer, his stories filling notebooks, and Sophie dreams of painting murals. I listen to their plans, my heart swelling, and promise myself to keep this space safe for them. I'm not perfect, but I'm theirs, and that's enough. I close my eyes, the glass cool against my palm, and breathe the weight of the past slipping further away. Life is small, but it's ours, and I'm learning to hold it gently to let it be enough. Sunday mornings are my quiet time now, a ritual I've carved out. I sit on the balcony with a notebook, not the blog, but something private where I jot down thoughts too raw for the world. Today the air is crisp, and I write about the woman I'm becoming, someone who doesn't flinch at shadows. Lucas and Sophie sleep in their soft snores, drifting through the open door, and I feel a stillness, not just in the apartment, but in me. The fight for my kids didn't end in the courtroom. It's in these moments
choosing to show up to be enough. I think about Clara's grit, Jack's steady hands, my mom's hesitant steps toward me. They taught me that strength isn't solitary. It's in the people who stay, who hold you up when your knees buckle. I used to think love was loud, a grand gesture to prove my worth. Now I see it's quiet in Sophie's bracelet on my wrist, Lucas's sketches taped to the wall, the way I keep going, even when I'm scared. Nathan's absence is a choice he made, and I've let go of the anger. I don't wish him ill, but I don't owe him my peace. The kids will ask about him, and I'll answer with honesty, not bitterness. That's my gift to them, a home free of resentment. I've learned that healing isn't a finish line. It's a path uneven and long, but worth walking. You don't erase pain, but you build around it brick by brick until it's just one part of your story. The biggest lesson, though, is simpler. It's about trust not just in others, but in yourself. I doubted I could be enough for my kids, feared my flaws made me less. But every day I choose them, I prove I am. You don't need to be perfect to be whole. You just need to keep showing up to love through the mess, to hold on when it hurts. That's what makes a life, not the battles you win, but the ones you keep fighting for. I close my notebook, the pages full, and look out at the waking city. My kids are my heart, but I'm learning to be my own too. This journey, it's ours, and it's far from over. What's a moment that made you realize your own strength? Share it below. Let's connect through our stories. If this touched you, please subscribe, or share it with someone who needs it. Thank you for being here, for listening. Here's to healing, to hope, and to the quiet courage in us all.